Us, who is hiding himself. Thank you, Prakash, for being on video. It's nice to see a friendly face. It makes me feel better and less nervous.
Okay, let me just check my email to make sure I didn't have anyone else who emailed. Okay. Jen, should we just give it one more minute to allow people to pop on and then we'll get started?
Well, you know, unfortunately, we are competing against the Game 5 of the World Series.
Oh, true. Oh my God, yes, I didn't even think of that.
It really just started because we had, I think, 30-something.
We better get going.
Yeah, I know. Well, the thing is, we had 30 plus registrants before, you know, the Yankees won last night, and now it's Game 5. So that's what we're competing against today.
True. Well, it's a little bit past 8 anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I want to thank the panel really quickly for taking some time. They've done a lot of pre-work to really make sure that they hit all of the points that they feel are really important for all of you to know. So please, Jen, I know you'll address this, but questions, please put them in the chat box in the lower right-hand corner. Jen will address them if they are pertinent to the topic at hand, and if not, then she'll wait till the end. But I just want to thank the panelists so much for being here. It's been great working with you, and I hope everyone enjoys the really great content that has been set for you. We're recording the session, so if you want to come back and review it, you'll have that opportunity. And so, Jen, I will just stop talking and, you know, get us to the World Series as fast as you can and pass it off to you.
And by the way, thank you so much, Shauna, and your team at the USTA and the Player Development Group for putting on such a great program for the October, College Awareness Month. So thank you for doing that. And given that we have a kind of a small, intimate group, if you don't want to put chat, you can also just use the little hand raising function, and we can actually just have a discussion here. In today's panel, we actually have a really nice, diverse group of parents. We've got, myself, Jennifer Driscoll, whose daughter is Katie Driscoll in the class of 25. And then with me is Chris Leona, whose son is Connor in the class of 24. And then we also have with us Caprielle. Caprielle, I like sometimes butcher your name, Karagosian. I did get that, didn't I? Yes, okay. And whose son is Alec, who's class of 23. And then just between us three parents, we are also covering Division 1, we're covering Division 3, and we're also covering tennis on campus, otherwise known as club tennis. So we've got, and then we're from Massachusetts, Connecticut, and all three of our players are actually staying within the New England, area, but had very national searches. So we'll, happy to talk about, that as well. So maybe just as a start, I'm going to ask Chris and Caprielle to join me in just kind of giving just a brief profile of your player, just so everyone can kind of relate to, just like who they are and, where they went to school, their academic and athletic profile. And Chris, would you like to kick us off there?
Sure. So it's nice to see everybody. My son Connor graduated this past spring. I went to Westford Academy, which is our public high school. He's always been a very good student. Pretty much a 4.0 and above, graduated with a 4.2, 1460 on his SATs. And I think he took 5 or 6 AP classes throughout his stay at the academy. So he's always been pretty motivated, pretty driven, pretty independent. Athletically, was multi-sport athlete until high school. In high school, he settled down into the tennis itself. His ranking, probably he's, been in the top 32 in New England since he was in 16s, not as high of a national ranking as some of the other guys. And his top UTR was 9.9 by the time he was kind of heading into his senior year of high school. He did play high school tennis all 4 years, in addition to competing at the USTA level. And he did very well there as well. He played #1 singles, captain of his team. So that's kind of a brief rundown on Connor.
That was so thorough, Chris. Caprielle, what about you and your son, Alec?
Yeah, Alec graduated 2 years ago. He's now a sophomore at Brown. He was at Belmont High School, which is our local public school here. He was a very good student, mostly A's, and SAT was 1580, so he did pretty well. And in the meantime, he was doing tennis with the USTA and as well as high school for pretty much, 6, 7 years. So in terms of his tennis standing, it was in the 16s. I'd say he peaked. He was in the top 10 in New England for quite some time there. And then he encountered a bunch of injuries as he got older, and he dropped down to, I'd say, top 20 as he was, junior and senior year. But he did qualify to some, to go to a bunch of nationals and stuff. So he had a lot of good exposure. He had a lot of fun. And but due to his injuries, we ended up switching tracks and going for club tennis in the end. So that's sort of the brief background. I'll get more into it later.
But by the way, Chris, can you just share with everybody where Connor is playing today?
Oh, I'm sorry. Connor's playing at Sacred Heart University down in Fairfield, Connecticut.
Great. And actually, I have a question that came through that actually segues right into my daughter's profile. The question is, how good do you have to be about what UTR to play at an academically competitive college? Top Division III academic schools seem to have very competitive teams, so I don't think it's as easy as just play D3 if you're good enough. If you're not good enough to play D1, Bill, that's your question, right? Okay, and Bill, do you have a daughter or a son?
I have a son. He's a freshman in high school, and just the other day, he loves tennis. It's his main thing. He's like, oh, what other sport can I do that I can play in college? Because his mindset is, oh my God, to go any D1, even the Ivy League, you got to be a 12, 13, 14. And then I don't know if he even knows this, but if you go to Middlebury or Colby, like they're 11s and 12s and everything. So is there, there's a real question. It's in real time. Like, why bother? Because you got to be unbelievably great to be on these teams, or maybe you're going to go to an obscure school somewhere. Because so that's a real time angst-filled issue.
Well,
you guys about.
Well, first of all, it's amazing because you're starting very early, so you're thinking, very early about it. The one thing I noticed in New England is our kids, boys and girls, are very smart. Okay. It's sometimes we see a lot of our kids' friends and, you think like they're academically generally pretty good. And then when everyone starts recruiting and you see where everyone's going, you're like, oh my God, these kids are all extremely smart. Like I actually didn't ask Chris and Caprielle what their kids' SAT or ACT or grades were, but like just what you guys shared was like amazing. And Katie's is very similar. So Katie, Bill, my daughter is very kind of the girl version of what you just said. Katie is a senior right now at the Hopkins School, which is a private school in New Haven, Connecticut. And she is a 35 out of 36 on the ACT, and she was a perfect score on the PSAT. She's generally an A+ student in very, very rigorous courses because her focus has been STEM. And so her focus in the recruiting process has been entirely in the high academic D3 programs, where you'll see that in the Division III, they really market the Division III now as like the best combination of academics and athletics. So if your kid isn't interested in playing kind of 30 to 40 hours of tennis, on a regular basis, and they are, more, interested in having like a balanced school, then Division III is a really attractive place because the NCAA has very specific rules around the number of hours that they're allowed to play each week. And the coaches definitely, when they talk about the Division III, they talk about openly about how school is first. So, we're going to kind of get into a little bit more to answer your questions specifically, but yes, we are that profile. And I would also say that we also had the very same concerns as you. Katie, at the time she was recruiting, well, she's at the end of her process now. She's a 7.8 UTR from a singles, 8.3 doubles, and yes, like high academic student from a test score and grades perspective. We did not think that she was going to be able to get into a lot of the schools that you named, which are, the high academic schools in the SCAT. And in fact, when I looked at their recruiting classes for the last couple of years, I looked at the UTRs, I too was saying like, holy shit, these schools are, from the girls' standpoint, they're recruiting, in the mid-8s. And I said, like, how is she actually going to get there? And what was really interesting, Bill, is that not only did she get there, she had 6 offers at top 10 ITA schools. ITA stands for Intercollegiate Tennis Association, which is the governing body of tennis under the NCAA. So she actually made it to that, even though she was 7-8 below what I saw those schools were recruiting. And the secret thing for her, and I think the others will concur, is really, it's the academics. The academics actually carried her farther and gave her more options than just her tennis UTR. Okay, so we're gonna hear more about this, throughout. Maybe let me just go back to Chris and Capriel a little bit. We get a lot of questions from parents about like, how do we start? How do we even decide like what is our target list and how do you go about putting that together? Chris, maybe you can start us off there.
Yeah, so Connor, being a pretty independent kid, drove most of this himself. He basically knew what he wanted to do and study. He wanted to get into a direct entry PT program, a 6-year program that by the end offers him his doctorate. So that's where he started, is looking at the schools that had those programs that he was interested in, and also looking at schools that had exercise science. His goal was, from the beginning, D1 tennis, but was definitely open to looking at D3 tennis as well. So that's really kind of where he started, is looking at those schools that had the program he wanted in New England and as far away as Pittsburgh, actually Milwaukee. He looked as far away at Marquette and Duquesne out in Pittsburgh.
And Capriel, how did you go about putting Alex, or how did Alec go about putting his list together?
Right. So it was a collaborative effort, I would say. So we looked at, actually, he wanted to stay in New England, generally speaking, within a few hours of Boston, let's say. So we sort of narrowed our search there. And then he was academically strong. So he wanted to get in. He didn't have a specific program in mind, but he wanted to get into a, I'd say, competitive school. So, we had a short list of maybe, 6 or 7 schools that he wanted to go to. And, some were D1, some were D3. And once we sort of identified those and we started looking at, what it would take to get in from a tennis point of view, let's say, with either a scholarship or just selection, whatnot. So we sort of had an idea of, and this, by the way, we were doing this freshman year, sophomore year in that timeline. And once we had sort of targets in place, we just, he loved tennis, so he was going to play it, but then we were being pretty, I would say, sober about it. And since he is strong academically, we, discussed it, and he agreed that he wasn't going to just drop, his classes and just go 100% tennis. He tried to keep a balance, essentially. I would say, his social life may have suffered a little bit because of all the, hours he's putting into both aspects of it. But still, he persevered and basically went in those 2 directions. Now, the idea was that, the trajectory on the UTR was looking good for him actually in September and in freshman and sophomore year. But still, you never know. And so we basically hedged our bets, and thankfully we did, because he got injured. So junior year, and we changed direction. So that's sort of how it started. Yeah.
Yeah, I know we're going to dive a little bit deeper into Alex's journey from varsity tennis to club tennis. I would say, in Katie's standpoint, we had originally thought that academics was the #1 priority and tennis was kind of a second priority. And what ended up happening was, through the recruiting process, we learned more and more. We started to follow schools online. We started to talk to coaches. We started to meet teams. And by the end of the process, actually the tennis became just as important as the academics, meaning that she didn't want to just go to a high academic school, but play on a team that she thought was not going to be competitive. So it started out as academics, and then it kind of went into both. But one of the tools that we looked at was we did look at the ITA site. So if you guys haven't looked at the ITA website, that's the Intercollegiate Tennis Association website that will show you the rankings of every single school in the country, whether it's NCAA Division I, Division II, Division III, the NAIA, the JUCO leagues, like everything is in there. So because our focus was Division III, we basically went to the ITA website. We, used the filters on women's teams, looked at the latest rankings, and then we just went through the top 50 ranked tennis programs. And then we picked out ones that we thought were academically interesting there she would, consider. I think Gabrielle and Chris, you guys were a little bit more focused, I think, your kids than mine, because we didn't honestly have a lot of confidence or even just education about where she might get in. We kind of started her list with maybe 24 schools, and then 24 kind of went down to like 18 schools. And then the last kind of 3 months before offer time, we were still carrying like 10 to 12 schools that we were in regular contact with. So, we really looked on ITA website, and then and kind of went from there. And then obviously we used tennisrecruiting.net to do a lot of research, and then went to a lot of their collegiate sites and did a lot of research. And of course, the UTR site as well.
Yeah. And Connor, as I said, did a lot of the back leg work, on his own, trying to figure out the schools he wanted to go to, the programs, looking at the UTR and the rankings that were on the teams of places that he might be interested in, trying to figure out, where it was that he could play. And he would tell you academics are so important. All the coaches ask about it. They want to know that your son or daughter can manage their academics, can do their work at school, that they as a coach are not going to have to go sell you to the admissions department. Like, I want this person on my team, but they might need a little help along the way. If they know that you can get in, if they know that you can do the work, they can move you, I think, a little bit farther in the tennis. And I think, he just, once he found those 6 schools that he got into, that were really, the top of his list with the programs that they had, then he was able to even get, closer, setting up his visits, going to see the campuses, going to meet the teams and the coaches, to see what his options were. Not at all 6 schools did he have the option to play. But we did, he did look into each school and just kind of, weigh it out there to see what his opportunity would be.
I think just to elaborate a little bit more on Chris's point about the academics is, I think a lot of parents underestimate how important and how much the academic profile of your child can take them. And let me kind of explain why. And again, I'll do it in the form of the Division III. In the Division III, it's a non-scholarship division. So there are no scholarships, okay? You can get academic money and or merit money, but there's no scholarship money. And so in the Division III, while the coaches do have sort of, 2 or 3 spots that, they can support an athlete, they don't have so much pull that they can just get you in if you don't meet the academic bar, right? And so if you think about the number of kids that actually have the academic profile that can get into some of these schools. So just to give you a sense of like what's in the Division III, there's a lot of high academic parents on here. So it's schools like MIT, Caltech, Emory, Amherst, Williams, Middlebury, Wesleyan, Johns Hopkins, University of Chicago, like Wash U, like these are all schools in Division III, Case Western, Carnegie Mellon. I mean, there's some like really big academic schools there. And those coaches will tell you is like, if you don't meet the academic bar, and those are the first interviews that Katie had, the first like 15 minutes was just dissecting her academics, because if they didn't see her meeting the bar, they really don't need to talk to you again. And that's really what happens. So the coaches won't spend 3 months, 6 months, 9 months with you to find out later that you don't meet the academics. They actually ask you up front, either an email or in the first phone conversation. And that's how they whittle you down. So if you think about it, like, let's just like I'm a quantitative person, so I'll just give it to you this way. Katie was ranked in the tennisrecruiting.net in the class of 25 in the top 200 at the time. She was like 193. And then you look at like 193 players and you say, is she really competing against 193 players? No, she's not, because 193 players don't have the academic profile. So let's just say of the 193 above her, well, and there's of course right below her that are also high academic, maybe there's only 30 girls that can actually 30 or 40 that kind of look like that, right? And then if you say there's 30 or 40, then you look at, well, how many of them have the interest in the schools that she does, the majors and or the UTR kind of profile. And then what you realize, as many coaches told us, is that they might start with 40 or 50 girls on their kind of list. And that's a combination of girls they're targeting and the girls that are, well, girls or boys that are interested in them. But that list gets sort of halved like right away once they dissect your academics. So it's not 40 and 50 anymore, it's like 20, right? And then from, let's say 20, then they start to watch you play, they're following your tournament records, they might have had a second or third conversation with you, they might go and visit you at a tournament, et cetera. And then basically after like that 20, maybe they invite 10 to 12 girls or players for actual visits, right? And those are the ones that are now in their top group that they're going to ultimately make an offer to. So if in your mind you're thinking like, oh, she or he is competing against like 200 people, actually it's not that big of a pool. And so just think about it. The higher the academic profile your child is, the more opportunities they have in front of them, because they're going to make the quote academic cut at more schools than players that don't have that same profile, right? Maybe you can, maybe Chris and Caprielle, you could talk a little bit about, as you were looking at these schools and sifting through all the information that's out there, did you guys enlist any help of, let's say, a consultant, other third parties, certain websites, recruiting portal, like what kind of outside sort of influences or help did you, seek, or did you need that? Caprielle?
Yeah.
So we did not really use any tools. I mean, Connor looked at the, the websites, UTR websites, to look at the team, look at the players, who was there. He was a little bit of a late bloomer too, in terms of his success. So he's someone who had pretty good freshman, sophomore year in high school on the USTA side of things. And then really kind of peaked in that January to July of his junior year of high school. And that's kind of probably what really solidified in some of the coaches' minds that he could play at that next level. But he did not go to any, the college exposure camps. He honestly chose to do tournament play. I mean, money, I'll be honest, money was an option. We weren't going to, it wasn't an endless bucket full of money. So he chose to take the time and the money to go to some tournament play, whether we stayed in New England or we traveled elsewhere to get exposure to other kinds of players. So that's kind of how we did all of that.
Caprielle, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it was more or less self-help here as well. As Chris said, I mean, we use the schools, obviously once we narrow down the list to some reasonable number, Alec went through and looked at the players in each team and their levels, trying to figure out, okay, with my trajectory, can I reach that level? And the other thing we did is that in our club, actually, the coaches were quite helpful. They have a lot of experience placing or going through this process, so they were educating us on how to get started and so on. So we mostly listened to them and used a lot of emails to reach out to coaches that we were interested in, and then once the coaches started responding, Alec would take it from there. My involvement was mainly with him was when we met the coaches in tournaments and so on. I didn't really engage with a coach myself, but prior to going there, we did some role playing, right? I mean, this is a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid and hasn't really been exposed to this kind of a scrutiny. So, I would act as a coach and sort of coach, train him a little bit on how to answer questions and, get ready for some of the typical questions that may come up. But basically this was the process. And then, we took the conversations further. What we didn't go as far as, Jen and Chris, because again, at some point we realized, he's just not going to be at the level he used to be because of the injuries. He keeps going forward and back and forward and back. So then we dialed it down. But Bill, to your question earlier, now, yes, your son may be asking about other sports and what else can I play and so on. All these sports are competitive, right? None of them are easy, right? So I think he has to decide. I mean, in our case, in Alex's case, he just loved tennis. I mean, he still is all in. Like he follows all the matches. He follows all the tournaments and he plays club. He's got on his spare time, he calls up friends. They go out and play. So for him, tennis it was not a burden. It was fun, right? And he had a lot of friends that, from the USTA tennis community, actually, they got to see each other all the time in tournaments and stuff. So if your son loves that, I think you should go with it, and then just be aware that as Jen and Chris mentioned, academics are so important. So if your son becomes a superstar, wonderful, right? You can use that and leverage that. But if he doesn't even become a superstar, having a commitment to tennis or any sort of an activity for 4 years or more are looked upon very, very favorably during the admissions process, right? It's not, just like, academics for sure. If you're not going to go tennis route or with the tennis route, you're going to be scrutinized on academics. But if you're not going to play on a tennis team, still the admissions are looking for commitment and maturity and long-term, commitment to tasks and goals. So tennis provides that, or any other sport can provide it as well. But just so happen if your kid loves it, then might as well do that, right? It's more fun.
Yeah,
And
I would say,
would-
sorry, just to
Yep.
follow up on that. Like, I don't know how serious of a question that was. He loves tennis, and he was like a frustration thing. Like, let me do something else. And just in your case, Capriel, just a quick follow up on that. So your son had incredible academic qualifications, obviously. I forgot, what is that? His UTR was like 9 or something. Is that right?
His UTR was 9.8.
9.8. So that's really high. So a very specific question I have, if you'll share it, is so a kid like that at Brown, who's not even at the top of the Ivy League tennis, like, did they recruit him? I'm sure they talked to him. He didn't get recruited at that.
No. It's definitely not. I mean,
very sobering.
Yeah, very sobering. I mean, you have the opportunity once you're in, right? Once you get into a school, whether any school really, you have the opportunity to be a walk-on, right? You don't have to be recruited. If you're really, if you feel like you're just at that borderline, like Alex actually, you can still try to walk onto the team and get on. But when, again, I'm straying here from our pre-planned conversations here, but basically the club tennis option is quite attractive because they practice 3 times a week, 2 hours at a time, and they play matches on, let's say, twice a month or so. So there's some competition and there's a lot of exercise, and so it's a good alternative to varsity. And again, if the kid really likes the sport, it's a very nice pathway, and it's a good, provides a good, work-life balance, let's say.
And I would say Gabrielle would and Alex would confirm is that a lot of the club tennis players at all of these same schools, they're all ex-tournament players. So these aren't just sort of like random low-level recreational players. They're all they all competed in some way, shape, or form, whether they were varsity tennis players or they were high school players or they were other USTA junior tournament players. But the club tennis is actually quite competitive, at almost most schools.
And just as I was listening to you guys, I just looked at the Brown University, to use that as an example. Like, their team, they've got 2 guys on the roster. At the bottom of the roster, they've got like an 8.6 and a 9.8. So they're on the team. The top guys,
Well, let me
like
address
12
that.
or 13, I think.
Well, let me address that. Let me address the leveling question, because a lot of people ask about that. Is that the one thing you have to be a little careful of is that, you know, as you guys know, when you go to UTR, for example, you can search up Brown University, you can search up Emory, you can search up whatever, and it's going to give you the list of the boys team and the girls team. The only UTRs on those sites that are accurate reflection of where their performance is now is really kind of the top 6 to 8 players on the team. In college tennis, it's basically 6 singles and 3 doubles, and then the singles players can repeat in doubles. So really the top 6 to 8 are active players. It is very, very common that the bottom of the UTR, what you see there, those are not the levels of where those players were at the time that they were recruited. So it's really important to go back and look at that. So for example, when I go and look at a team on UTR, I don't look at, honestly, the juniors and the seniors. I look at where did that coach recruit in the most recent class as a freshman. Maybe I'll go back and look at sophomore, and then I will click on a player and literally search through their UTR history for the fall of their senior year, because that is more reflective of where that coach recruited that player. And when you look at the players at the bottom, 100% of the time I'd click in and go, oh, that girl looks like a 7.2. And then I go back and I'm like, oh, but she was recruited it when she was an 8.2, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can't look at the current if they're the bottom. You got to go back and scroll to where their levels were at the time of recruitment, and that will give you a better indication of where the range is.
Even more sobering.
Sorry.
It is more sobering. I would agree with you 100%. I would tell you though, Connor's freshman and sophomore year in high school, we did get to a point kind of sophomore year, like, is D1 really an option? Sacred Heart's a D1 school. It is not a top level D1 school. It's a school that probably ranks in there too. You know, they actually just had a tournament a couple weeks ago, and Wesleyan, which is a D3 school, actually beat them. So, you know, you're looking, it's really important, I think, to find that type of school you want to go to, looking at the different schools where they are. I think there is a lot of opportunity to play tennis around the country, whether it be D1, D3, and just trying to find those places that interest him. Connor would tell you, reach out often. As soon as you're allowed to start sending those emails and contacting coaches, if your son finds a space that he is very interested in or types of school, send the email out. Put their email, you know, they have their email address, put their cell phone in it. When the coaches are able to contact the players, they really like to talk to those student athletes and find out what's going on, what they're doing, and then they can start to follow them. The UTR is obviously important because the coaches are looking at that, but you know, he's a freshman in high school. I think he's got some space to move and, you know, some space to work.
I mean, on that point, most of the coaches will tell you. So, like, let's say, for example, by the way, for those of you who care a lot about UTR, you'll notice that when you search for a team, one of the numbers that you see on the top of the UTR page for that school is what they call a Power 6. Okay, the Power 6 number is important. Well, it's a metric that I looked at because the Power 6 is the aggregate UTR of the top 6 players on the team. Okay, and the reason why they do top 6 is because those are the ones in the main lineup, right? So once I started to see where Katie's level were, when I started to search for a school on UTR, I would know, okay, Katie's going to be mostly attractive to schools that are in the ones that we wanted were in like the high 40s, maybe 50. But if I saw a Power 6 like at Northwestern that was like 61, I'd be like, okay, this is not like, this is way outside of her, you know, her league. But in terms of like ranges, is many coaches said, because I would have open conversations with coaches and she would too, and we would say like, oh, the girls that you recruited last year or even this year already are like 8.6 UTRs and Katie's a 7.8, right? Why is she of interest to you? Why is she on your radar? And what the coaches will tell you is that they're not looking for a specific number. They have a range that they're looking at because they're identifying your child at the beginning of a junior year, knowing that they still have 2 years of development until they actually set foot on campus. So many coaches said that, especially like in the top of the Division III, let's say girls, even if they were recruiting 8.5, 8.6, 8.7, he said, my range of player is really 7.5 to 9, right? And I was like, oh, okay. So that's why my daughter's of interest, because he's like, I may look at her now and she's a 7'8", but by the time she steps on campus, she very well might be an 8'8". Right? So they're always looking for a range, and the range can be literally, let's call it half a point to 3/4 of a point below and above where you might see their middle is, right? So even if your son or daughter doesn't look exactly like something on their team page, they, as long as they are kind of, let's call it up and down the range within half to a point, they're probably still somewhat of interest to that coach. And then of course the academics comes out, around it, because in Katie's case, I'm almost positive that she beat out for offers other girls that were, I know for a fact, other girls that were higher UTRs than her, but she had better grades than them, right? And those girls couldn't get in and she could, right? Let's move on to the topic of sort of communication, right? We all talked about the first communication. Maybe Gabrielle, Chris, to speak a little bit about what was the primary mode of communication? Was it email? Was it phone? Was it text? And after that initial email, when that coach kind of took a little bit of interest, how frequent were your child's communications with that coach? And what were those interactions like? What were the topics, the agendas? Like, what was the coach asking? Up until that sort of offer period. Chris?
So the initial interactions were all emails that, Connor reached out. I would say the majority. He did get a couple calls from some coaches that had seen him play in tournaments. So that definitely happened in the beginning. And I'd say in his junior year, probably summer after his junior year, honestly. But most of the conversation was through email. And as I mentioned before, Connor put his cell phone in it and the coaches would actually text him. There were text conversations, how are you doing in school? How are things going? What are your tournaments like? Do you have any tournaments coming up? Especially in the fall. In the spring, they would ask about his high school. In the spring of his junior year, if he was talking to anyone, then they were, they asked about how the team was doing. And then really once he whittled it down to the 4 or 5 schools that he had the option to play at, then he started talking about, can I come out and visit? This is the program I want to get into. The first one we went and looked at was Sacred Heart, and that was June. I think that was before sectionals, right before the summer after his junior year. And we just went, we met up with the coach. He took us on a walk around campus, told us all about the campus, told us about the program, asked about Connor's academics. Connor asked him questions about the makeup of the team. What are practices like? What are facilities like? And honestly, the irony is, it's kind of funny. The 2 D1 schools that it came down to as options, they had no facilities on campus, and the 1 D3 school he was considering had facilities on campus. So those were interesting things to learn. Who had what and where, and what does it mean trying to get to, practice all the time if you don't have facilities on campus, that kind of stuff. And that was very similar, but and when we went to visit the D3 school was Ithaca, and that coach did the same thing, took us around on a tour. I was with them the whole time. And then he asked if he could talk to Connor individually on his own. So I let Connor and he go off and chat. He really kind of told Connor what he was looking for, why he was interested in Connor, his game style. Connor actually at Ithaca got to play with some of the players without the coach present. He couldn't be there, but then, we worked out with the players talked to the coach, the coach talked to him about his game, that kind of thing. And then he did an overnight at a couple of the campuses. He went back for a second visit to do overnight, stayed with one of the players, got to watch practice, couldn't practice with them. And, had some conversation with, really in both of those instances, the coaches wanted to see how he gelled with the team. Wanted to see how he got along with the players, let him get a feel for what the campus was like.
Gabrielle, were Alex's interactions any different? Was there anything that kind of stood out in his process?
Well, we didn't go through the entire process like you guys did. So our involvement was mostly in the early stages. And, it starts with, he started with emails by reaching out to them, and what happened is there's a few schools that he was specifically interested in, and lately there's been in the last few years, I guess, there's this trend of a lot of coaches holding their own sort of mini UTR tournaments, sort of like a exhibition kind of thing. Like Tufts has it, and Yale has it, and a bunch of other schools have it. Yeah, many of them have it now. So we went to a few of those actually. That was interesting because you could see, he actually ended up talking to the coach there in person and interacting with them, as well as exposing his his tennis skills and whatnot. But this was pretty early, so and then after that, basically, once we sort of realized he's not gonna go beyond a certain level because of injuries, we just stopped really interacting with coaches. So I'm not familiar at all with the later stages.
Yeah, I mean, I could say that for us, because we were targeting academics first, when we made our list, based on the ITA ranking plus our academic interest, in the fall of the summer after sophomore year and fall of junior year, we actually took weekends or like 3-day weekends where they didn't have school, and we just actually went on regular college visits ourselves. We just looked online and we would type in, Amherst information session or Amherst college tour, and then we just went. So we probably went to 8 different schools. They were on her target list, but she just kind of wanted to see them and see, would I like them there? Are they kind of rural? Are they a big city? Or are they not? So we actually went on info sessions and tours just on our own for probably 8 schools that we weren't invited to. But what we did do is that before we went, we actually used that opportunity to email coaches to let them know that we were coming, right? Mm-hmm. So we didn't always wait to be invited. We booked a date and we would email the coach and say, hey, Coach Jackie, this is Katie Driscoll. I'm going to be on campus on, Friday, October 8th, info session 11. And I was wondering if you would have time to meet with me, right? And I would say maybe half the coaches responded and said, "Oh, great to hear from you. Yes, stop by my office or come by the indoor courts at this hour." At that point, it wasn't so much recruiting; it was like getting to know, right? Mm-hmm. Because what we found is that we started reaching out to coaches in the spring of sophomore year, and honestly, it was too early. They didn't really care, right? They were all focused on that in-year recruiting class, and then summer, it's still that year recruiting class, and they really didn't start to look at the next year's recruits until, let's call it October, November of the junior year. And that's because everybody has fall season where their new players come in that they're getting to know, their old players are returning, and they have like a bunch of fall tournaments and invitationals that they're training for. And so they didn't really look at the next year recruits until kind of October, November. And then it was like that period all the way until summer where the correspondence was pretty much once a month. And once a month, we would find reasons to reach out to them. In talking to other parents and players, like some of them would say, well, how are you reaching out to them like once a month? What do you have to say to them? Like, my daughter or son isn't generating enough, whatever. Okay, I know this sounds very tactical, but this is kind of how we would think, is I would look at it and say, well, Katie, we have to reach out to these coaches once a month. So don't always give out everything that you have that you want to say. Maybe talk about this in March, talk about this in April, talk about this in May, and find things, And it was everything from how well she did in a tournament to maybe, her scores on her recent AP test, or, maybe something in singles or a doubles win or something. We were giving them updates on athletic accomplishments as well as academic accomplishments, things just to keep the dialogue going. And I would say 80% of the time, it wasn't it generated another phone call or some big long email response. It was pithy. It was 2 sentences hey, Katie, thank you so much for checking in, great results. Look forward to keeping in touch, and that's kind of it, and we got a lot of those really probably until January, February, where the really interested coaches started to invite her for next level conversations and ultimately invited her to come for visits.
Yeah, I think it's really important. The whole what you say, Jen, about going on the campus tours. We did a lot of that too up front. Just went did road trips, looked at 3 or 4 different colleges, different types of campuses. Honestly, if your child is young enough, freshman or sophomore, if you're going on a family vacation and there's a university in the area, is it a big city? Is it a small town? Just getting a really good feel for that is pretty important. All these places, most of them anyway, they're expensive places for them to go to school. They're looking at their academics. They want a good, they want to, accomplish things there as well as maybe the tennis. But if something happens and they're halfway through their collegiate career and they're not playing tennis anymore, or they get a severe enough injury that it knocks them out, they want to be happy where they are. They want to be able to continue where they are or come up with a plan B that works for them. So it is really important to find a space that, they are going to be comfortable in and a place they can go to. And back to the, the money and stuff, that's also extremely important. It was a big factor for us looking at, as Jen says, D3 only offers merit money. D1 offers, merit and athletic. The majority of the money that Connor received is academic money. He got a very small portion of athletic money, and that is renewable every year. He could still be on the team next year and may not get that athletic money, but he will get.
Let's stop there for a minute because a lot of people don't know that. Athletic money is not a 4-year commitment, right? It's only commitment for 1 year, and then your child has to earn based on performance or whatever that 2nd year, 3rd year, and 4th year. The academic money is yours for 4 years. Okay.
Yep.
So that is a very key differentiator. And I would say that not all schools, even in the Division I, are scholarship schools. The smaller.
No, they aren't.
Yeah,
they aren't. And the other thing that we learned, one of the schools that Connor got an offer from, they do not allow, their school policy is not to stack a scholarship, meaning where he is at Sacred Heart, he has academic money and he has athletic money. This other school that he was given an offer at, he was told he could get this much academic or he could get this much athletic. Now they were comparable, but he couldn't take them both. So that's actually a question. That's something we didn't realize until we were having that conversation with that particular school, which made us go back to Sacred Heart and say, so we just learned this. Do we get both? Are we able to take advantage of both? And at Sacred Heart, you can. That was something interesting for us to learn.
Hey, Prakash, I'm going to change the subject just a little bit because I think I know what you're going to ask, but Prakash had a question about high school tennis, so go ahead.
Hey, thanks, all. So yeah, my daughter is a junior right now, and she's a mid-6 UTR. For the target school she wants, I think she needs to be at least a 7.5, 8. So, rule of thumb is, 1 point if everything goes well or whatever. Now, the problem is she loses 3 months for high school tennis. So I was trying to figure out how important it is. She loves high school tennis, by the way. When I asked, do you want to play college? She's like, yeah, I don't know. But then she's played 2 years of high school tennis and she's like, she loves it. Now she's like, oh, I want to play in college, right? So she loves it.
Well, Prakash, you're talking to 3 parents whose kids played all 4 years plus more of high school. Yep. All of us did.
Yeah.
Yep. And by the way, I'm next town over from Chris. I'm in Acton, by the way. So I've seen Connor play a few times. They actually went to Emilio Sanchez one year. I think they both went together too. So
yeah.
But the reality is those 2-3 months. She doesn't get the regular training she does. She can't play most tournaments. So it does take a hit. So I'm like, how she could be training and she could get the UTR up. Should I do that or should I have her play high school? So any thoughts?
Well, I can tell you from Connor's perspective, Connor loved being on a team. Absolutely loved being on a team. That's how he was. He loved baseball. He loved basketball. He loved that team component. So for him, he loved being on the high school team. And as you know, we're in a good league. So there's, decent competition, especially for the boys if you're at 1 and 2 in the dual county league. And so he was fortunate to have that. it's a big consideration, I guess, depending on what your goals. We did have that conversation junior year, should he bow out junior year and should he play those tournaments? And he opted for being able to play for his high school on the team. And we tried to get in some of those tournaments strategically. And actually, it was kind of funny because that year, his junior year, he won those tournaments. But he strategically looked at those tournaments and played when he could. And he practiced beyond his high school practice. So he would play every day at high school, and then he would usually train 2 or 3 days a week later than high school. And
I think that's the key. Yeah, that's the key.
He was on the courts on Saturdays and Sundays, with some, people training on their own, like Lucas Bickesbacher and Sonic Mana. They were out there on the weekends. They were out there in the evenings getting that level of competition that they needed.
I would say the same is that Katie played high school tennis all years, but she would also go to her regular indoor club practices either afterwards. And she still played tournaments where part of it is conversation with your high school coach where, Katie said to him, like, I want to be a recruited athlete. And he said, and we want you to do that as well. And then we gave him a list of tournaments that we wanted to play during high school season. And, we said, are there any of these that you would be okay that she would miss this, this particular game? And he said, yes, there's some, other teams that maybe are a little bit lower that I can play our exhibition players or lower lineup players. You go ahead. And so maybe out of like a 10-week season or 11-week season, she was still playing a tournament every 2 weeks. So it wasn't like she really gave up like tournaments the entire time. And I think like Chris said, is like the kids love it. If I took her out of high school tennis and I too had that conversation, she was like, no, I'm not doing it. And so ultimately, if you take them out of something that they love and all they're doing for that 3 months is like grinding, like trying to get their UTR up, I mean, I don't know that's really like, but we have plenty of friends who there were many girls of Katie's cohort. I think half of them played their high school seasons and half of them did not. And there really isn't any appreciable difference in the end schools that they got into. It wasn't like those girls ended up at like far better schools tennis wise or academically than Katie.
Yeah.
The only thing I would say, sorry, Capriel, the only question I have is when we got into that junior year, we were looking at the MIAA rules, right? Because Westford Academy is governed by the MIAA. And you can't, our understanding, and I would have to go back to the MIAA, and I don't know if Shauna has any thought, knows anything about this, but we were under the impression that Connor could not miss any matches that were, scheduled for Westford Academy to go elsewhere and play a tournament. And I think there was one tournament where he literally got rained out, or I don't know, something happened. And next thing you know, we were in the car driving as fast as we could to Rocky Hill so he could play in the tournament on a Friday night. So I think you do have to double check those rules in Massachusetts anyway. I'm not sure. And if you're she's in a private school in Connecticut, that might be a little different.
Got it.
It is different.
Yeah, Chris.
Gabrielle.
No, Chris is right. I mean, as far as I remember too, that I had to play. We couldn't get out of it, but we try to make it work. Actually, we sometimes talk to the tournament director in advance. We said, hey, can you schedule his game late at night, like the last match of the first day, and that sort of thing. If the distance is reasonable, it worked out. Like if the tournament was in Rhode Island or something, then it was workable. But again, we did not give up on high school tennis because he was having so much fun with it, and he was having fun at the tournaments too. So it was. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I think you can make it work.
Yeah. Bill, you had a point about, about high school tennis being a part of UTR. And the answer is that it actually varies. There are many, many high schools whose high school matches count for UTR, and it varies by, it's not even a state thing. It's actually by league and conference. So for example, Katie's conference in the Connecticut area is called the FAA, Fairchester Athletic Association. Our coach basically said at the beginning of the year, the coaches talk and they say, do you want it to count for UTR or not? In her freshman and sophomore year, they counted it for UTR, and then they decided not to. So, but we see many kids in Eastern section who live in New Jersey, New York, all their high school matches are in there. So it's not a one or the other. It's really based on your area and what your league and conference kind of vote on. But plenty of people's matches are in high school are in UTR.
Thank you.
Given the time we have left, we can either, I have one more question for the folks, or we can take Q&A or both, but maybe we'll finish this with this question is when, and a little bit different for Chris and Capriel, but Chris, on your side, after the whole recruiting process, how did Connor ultimately decide? What were the final sort of factors between the various offers that he had, where he, that impacted his decision on where he wanted to go? And then Capriel, the question for you was that, you guys went down the varsity recruiting route for some period of time. Alec decided in the end to go the tennis on campus / club route. What were the factors that ultimately led to your decision, or Alec's decision to do that? And maybe Capriel, I'll actually start with you.
Sure. Basically, I would say the decision was sometime, again, I'm getting old and my memories are getting a little hazy here, but basically, I think sometime in the junior year, early part of the junior year, he took the decision mainly based on looking at the schools that he wanted to go to. And we had done those self tours that Jen's talking about. Those are great, by the way. You should definitely do it, regardless of tennis. But anyway, so based on those schools that he liked, he looked at his UTR and the injuries he was having. He just didn't see himself getting to, like a 10.5 or higher in time to be recruited. So based on that decision, he says, okay, I'm going to, I think, just go with club, but I'm not going to give up on tournament tennis because he really liked it. So, but it was a decision point, I would say fairly late decision point in the process. Although for D3s, I think, I forget now when D3s recruit, they recruit later than D1. So
they make offers in the summer, starting in the summer and early fall of the senior year.
Right. So anyway, so that's kind of our decision was based on his trajectory and the achievable, at least partly based on UTR, partly based on conversations with coaches that the feedback we had received.
Yeah, Chris, what about you?
So ultimately, I would say it came down to money. The programs that Connor was looking at were 6-year programs. He got a definite, a nice slice of the pie for academic money, but for undergraduate, they really don't give out much for graduate. So being that his programs were going to be 3+3, so 3 years undergrad, he's doing his undergrad in 3 years, and then he does 3 years of graduate. Most of his money is up front in the first 3.5 years. And I think, we just put the big spreadsheet up on the wall, and this is how much each one will cost, and this is how much money they gave you. Went back and asked for more. Some gave some more, some didn't. And he honestly took his time to make his decision, and he got a couple offers later. And the coaches were very patient, actually. The coaches let him make his decision over time. He did not commit until April of his senior year in high school. But ultimately, it was money and the fact that he was going to be able to compete on the team. That was important to him. He wanted to have the opportunity to compete. There were a couple schools that maybe he would have got on the team, but in reality, how much time would he get in that 6-person lineup? And at Sacred Heart, he felt like he would have that opportunity to get into that lineup. And it had ultimately to their academic program. They're just really building their sciences. And so he was very excited about that.
So, what's interesting is like either one of you said, and I fall into this boat too, a lot of people say, oh, you pick the school that you like the best, or the team that you gel with, or the coach that you get along with most. Katie didn't think about those things at all. And the reason is because she's like, those of you guys that know her, she's a really easygoing kid. She's like, likes a lot of people. She's pretty likable. So it wasn't like there was like one school where the coach was like amazing. Most of the coaches that she met at the top school, she was like, oh yeah, I could see myself playing for them. And the same thing on the team. She met like a lot of different teams. She liked most of them. So it wasn't like one team culture stood out that was so much better. So because those were kind of all generally neutral for her, she ended up choosing like a small handful of schools that were just academically where she felt like she would be happy going, and then looked at the intersection with tennis, right? And the intersection really had to be there. So I'll give you like a prime example. A lot of people would say Caltech is like one of the best schools in the world. Katie is heavily recruited by Caltech, but Caltech is number 40 in the ITA Division III. And so she was like, yeah, I know that sounds dumb, right? That I wouldn't like apply to Caltech, even though they want me. But she goes, Mama, like Caltech is like, they're never going to vie for a conference title. They're never going to make it to the NCAA. And so like, I'd be going there to just play like a regular college season, right? And for her, she, you know, like made it to the national level from a USTA standpoint. And she saw herself like kind of competing for like the conference titles. And it was important for her to be on a competitive enough team that had a chance to like get to the NCAA, maybe not like win the NCAA, but like to kind of get to that next postseason step. And so there were some schools that really wanted her, but the tennis like just wasn't strong enough. And so she just knew like, I can't be all academic and be at a low tennis school. I don't think I'd be that happy there. So our final decision was the academic high and the tennis as high as possible, that she felt like she could have a chance to have a really competitive collegiate tennis experience. Any, I mean, those are really like our prepared questions today, but maybe just open up to the floor for some casual, you know, Q&A there. Mari, anything from you that you want to explore? You've been so quiet and patient this last hour.
I have Dean sitting here also with me and my husband. I said, does anyone have questions?
Hi, Dean. Hi, Mr. Jackson.
Yeah. Yeah, everything's been so great. And we listened to the first 2 webinars too, so that answered a lot of questions. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I guess my question maybe to Caprielle is your son, you know, very happy at the tennis on campus level? I mean, because I feel like that's something we haven't really explored too much quite yet. Dean's only a junior, so just starting the process.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before, he loves tennis, right? So he wanted to play tennis throughout college in one form or another. So what he likes about, you know, tennis on campus is that it's the flexibility, because he's also pretty serious about his major, and he's got some internships that are going on during the semester. He's got a TA role and stuff. So basically the club gives him the flexibility to manage his own schedule, as opposed to being so rigid. So for example, there is a you know, women's club team, there is a men's club team. There's a lot of club players, but they're all quite good. And then there is a one day of the week they practice together. So you really have a lot of opportunities to select. You don't have to go every single time. So it gives him a lot of flexibility to do this or that, and he's very happy about it. And on the weekends, you know, he either plays with friends or goes and competes against another school. So yeah.
What about Bill or Prakash? Or I think I see somebody who is in video is Melissa. If you, I saw you for a second. Anybody else have any sort of final questions? Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for joining us tonight. It was actually a really nice, intimate discussion. So I think you guys probably know how to find it. And if you want more information, just email Shauna, and I'm sure she can make our information available if Chris and Caprielle are willing. Prakash, you know where to find me. Mara, you know where to find me.
Yeah,
Thank
please,
you so much.
feel free to reach out.
Feel free to reach out. Happy to talk to anyone.
Same.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Back to the
Thank
World
you so
Series.
much.
Okay.
Have a great night.
Bye.
I learned a
care.
lot, by the way. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Bye.
Bye-bye.